This is Coda Radio, episode 317 for July 9th, 2018. Welcome to Coda Radio, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly talk show, taking a pragmatic look at the art and business of software development and its related technologies. This episode is brought to you by our two great sponsors, DigitalOcean and Linux Academy. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week, like that man up in the treehouse spying on the whole neighborhood like an awkward old man, it's Mr. Dominic. Hello, Mike.
System that misa da cha-cha-pings.
Oh, good. I thought maybe you'd forgotten somehow about that. Well, Mr. Dominic, it's good to be with you today. I'm live from Keller, Texas, back down at Linux Academy in one of their recording booths right now. Although I have a feeling that everybody in the general area of the office can probably hear me because once I get on mic, I get loud. I get big and loud. So I have a feeling everybody's listening to the show right now. We have a live audience. We have a lot to get into. We have a chat with Jérôme from Uno, which we mentioned last week.
Fantastique. I'm sorry.
Yep. He'll come on and tell us how wrong Mike is about stuff. And
correct.
And also crush our dreams about a future compiler, but then elate us with their accomplishments and what the project is doing. It's a great chat. That's coming up in a little bit. We just got done recording that. But Mr. Dominic, we have some feedback to get into, as we like to do things here on the show, an appropriate kind of way to warm us up. We got an email that came in, and I thought this was a good one from Doug. He says, I just went on a coder binge listening to the last 3 episodes today, and I like the way the show fluctuates between the fun and serious aspects of work and business. I also appreciate how Mike lays out his opinions in an unapologetic but respectful way. Keep up the good work. Here's my dilemma. See, he warms us up, and then he comes in with the hard-hitting questions. He says, my 10-year-old son has a strong interest in coding and computers. He's worked in Scratch on the Raspberry Pi, but he quickly became bored with the limitations of that system. I've tried to introduce him to Python since it has a reputation of being a beginner-friendly language. However, I simply don't know enough about coding to teach him anything useful. It's a classic example of the blind leading the blind. What he really wants is an IDE and language with a visual interface and syntax similar to the Scratch IDE, but with more versatility. The elementary school keeps recommending Swift, but my son has had a legit hatred for Apple because he can't open up their machine, so how does he know how they work? Attaboy! He would prefer to continue to use Linux, but he's not opposed to Windows either. Oh. What are your thoughts and recommendations? Thanks for the show. What do you think, Mike? What can we do for Doug's kid?
Your son is a wise and powerful Sith he will become. First of all,
yeah,
I don't know what shitty school he's going to.
Listen to that boy. He knows what he's talking about. That kid's got some good instincts, first of all.
Yeah. First of all, Swift is never the answer. All right. Now, I have a brother around the same age, 11 years old. So what I've been doing with him is code.org, which has actually Star Wars themed. And it has a bunch of other stuff for girls and boys. It's an interesting situation, Chris. They've partnered with a bunch of brands it's completely free, but they're like popular kids things, like they have Rey from Star Wars and Kylo Ren and the new droid BB-8. But they also have like princesses and stuff like that. So they're coding challenges in either Python or JavaScript that you do right in your Chrome web browser. Really good, kind of the same visual experience that you would get in a Scratch IDE. Now, if he's a little more advanced than that, there's also, of course, the great book on Amazon that's only about $15, Python for Kids. A lot of great introductory programming challenges for kids in the Python programming language, which of course is a love of the Linux community. As long as it's not Rust, he's okay. I feel like I got off the rails there.
Well, it's all right. I feel like the core of it was good. And I think, so we'll have a link in the show notes. That's a good recommendation, a good place to start. I love it, Doug. Thanks for sending that in. Our next one comes in from Joe, and he's got a problem. He says, I've written in before and loved Jupiter Broadcasting, and of course, Coda Radio. I'm an extroverted individual. I work a typical 9-to-5 job in IT, and I've worked it before, and I've found that I have a passion in DevOps, planning out systems, and I even love digging into some C#. I love web technologies, and I love building C# apps, but I go crazy after 4 to 6 hours in a cube or even just staring at a screen. I just need people time. Currently, I'm out there, micro business thing, doing custom CRM, ERP work for my local clients. I love getting the contract, setting up the solutions, but just get emotionally and mentally bogged down sitting at the keyboard for too many days in a row. Am I just not meant for coding? I can build apps successfully. It's just draining. Is there a better role for someone like me? Thanks in advance for doing what you guys do. Joe. So the core issue is he can build great applications, but it takes a great toll on him. Like, there's a cost. So every great thing he makes, there's this toll that sort of slowly kills his soul. Is he just not cut out for it, Mike, or do you think it's something else?
No, I don't think it's that.
Lay us your wisdom.
Yeah, I don't think it's that. I think he's fine. Obviously, I don't know. I think you're fine. I mean, if you're working anywhere with cubicles, that's already a different problem. Have you considered using something like Project Uno and writing C# in an environment that's not like openly hostile to your sanity?
I was going to say, like, I wonder if Project Uno has something here for this. Also, what about something like the Pomodoro or whatever you call it, Pomodoro timer, where you set in some breaks and you like give yourself time, like a system?
Yeah, so it's great. So I do 25 minutes of coding, then I make a martini, then I do some more coding.
That does sound great. So, Joe, I would say what you're really looking for is some balance. You got to find some. I have the same issue when I'm editing. And the biggest problem is, for me, it's like I have the whole timeline of a show in my head. And like the narrative and all of it is in there, especially for the ones that are heavily edited. And so it's almost impossible to stop because like you lose so much state and it takes so much to get back to that state. But if you habitualize it and you really stick to it, and in some cases you build a system around it, you'll find that you'll also be able to habitualize getting back to that state. It just takes really sticking to it and committing to it. This crazy old man on Twitter tweeted me at Dumanuko. Domco. I'm not sure. I've never.
Oh, this sounds like some alcoholic living in the jungle, Yoda style.
Yeah.
Who's this?
He says, at Chris Lass, what is the name of that fancy email app you've mentioned on Coda Radio before? And so I tweeted him back and said that what you're thinking of is MailSpring. It's an Electron-based app. It has that cool read notification support. And, of course, it's Electron, so it works on Linux and all the other ones as well. So that was MailSpring. You wrote back and said, well, the guy that works for Thunderbird has just convinced me to use Thunderbird. Apparently he's doing his job. Good job, Ryan.
Yes. Good job, Ryan.
So I wanted to throw a wrench in the works and tell you about one that I switched to over the weekend. I'm not 100% on it because it's only for iOS, or I guess if you have a Mac. But because I'm trying to triage a certain inbox while I'm on mobile, that works for me. But stick with me for a second. It's called Spark. And it offers like one of those smart inboxes, so people that have emailed you directly versus like social newsletters and the things that like Google has started to do, but this is not a Google, it's a native client. It lets you snooze emails, so you can like say, I'll swipe it off to the side and say, remind me tomorrow at 8 a.m. But here's the reason why I'm trying it. It's basically Google Docs for email. It has real-time collaborative email editing. I can share an email with somebody else, and then they also will get all of the updates in that thread. So I might be emailing back and forth, say, with a guest, but I can have Angela get a copy of the entire conversation thread. She can leave comments in there that never show up in the email, but I see them in like a Google, just like Google Docs, where you can have a chat, and then we can both be typing in there, and we get different colored names, badges. As you're typing, you can see where each person is at. You can share drafts, so one person can modify it, and it's all in my inbox. Plus, it unifies the inboxes, so I can have multiple inboxes in there, so I can have multiple shows in there. And it has different signatures for different kinds of emails, which is nice, and you just kind of swipe through them. It's got what it calls smart notifications, which don't really work for me, but it's supposed to only alert you for important emails. That's really just emails that are sent directly to you, which I get tons of. And It also integrates in with like Dropbox and Google Docs, so I can easily just add like a Google spreadsheet to an email, which is kind of nice when you're on mobile. So Spark, sparkmailapp.com. I'll have a link in the show notes, coder.show/317 if you want to try it. Now, it's a total curveball because they don't have a Linux client, they don't have a Windows client, and they don't have a web client. So it's a bit of a curveball solution. But if you just are looking for something on iOS or the Mac or the iPad, which is iOS, yeah, it's decent. It seems pretty decent so far. I'm not sure I'm going to stick with it because of the lack of a desktop client. So in the meantime, I'm continuing just to use Spark on the desktop. And I've got like 6 mail accounts in Spark that I'm checking mail for all the time. And I like it. It does the job, you know what I mean? It works well enough. So check it out. Spark. It's at, I think, Spark app. One other thing I like about it is I think it's pretty neat that you can link emails. So I have an email here from Joe, and I'm just reading it. And I'm like, you know what? I want to save that in Coder. So I can just share a link to my bookmark service and have it ready for the show so I can process it as I'm reading it. So I really like that about it. So if you're curious, check it out. It's a pretty good app. It's Spark. Their slogan is love your email again. It's sparkmailapp.com, which...
doesn't matter. I'm still going to hate my email.
Yeah, I will too. Well, Mr. Dominic, we have much to get into, including our chat with Jérôme. So let me mention Linux Academy, which is where I'm at right now. linuxacademy.com/coders with an S. Yeah, it's great. It's hot. It is so hot here. These Linux Academy folks are working in the heat to generate more content than they have ever launched in the history of Linux Academy. July is the month where over 150 courses and challenges and learning activities and new categories are launching at Linux Academy. They're live streaming all week doing giveaways, which might be worth checking out if you'd like to. linuxacademy.com/live for that kind of stuff. It is really big. They're getting into security now, updates to AWS courses, Azure, and of course the Linux Essentials. Because if it runs Linux or Linux runs on it, Linux Academy has courseware, comprehensive study guides, downloadable audio, and like notebooks that you can keep on your machine and keep track of and read offline if for some reason there's an internet apocalypse or maybe you're dropping packets like I am today. I mean, you never know when you just want something offline. Plus, they'll spin up virtual servers for you as part of the courseware, and they're there to answer your questions. They have real human beings, instructors, answer your questions when you get stuck. And that is a massive feature because can you imagine? Think about that from a business perspective, how they do that. They've got topic experts that are in there creating courseware and answering your questions all the time. For the platforms that make your resume look good and help you get a new job, or help you get trained up in a new area. They have content tracks too if you need to switch tracks in the career. So great. linuxacademy.com/coders. Go there to support the show and sign up for a free 7-day trial. That's linuxacademy.com/coders. Okay, so we have Jérôme join us here in just a moment. He is from platform.uno. We talked about Uno recently. It is so cool. It is something that's been in the works for a while, and it allows you to build native apps for mobile and the web using XAML and C#. It has a cool online playground, and it appears to have a very bright future. Jérôme, welcome to the show. And for folks that didn't hear last week's episode or want to hear it from the horse's mouth themselves, could you tell us a little bit about Uno?
So Uno is something that my company and I have been working on for about 4 years now, which is an implementation of UWP on iOS and Android. And quite recently, we've been trying out to make it run on WebAssembly as well. So it's basically taking something that runs on UWP, compiled with C#, and cross-compile it to iOS, Android using Xamarin, and using Mono on WebAssembly and run it in the browser.
Awesome. So, wow. Jérôme, is it fair to say that WebAssembly is the API you're targeting as the developer?
Not really. No. What we're targeting is basically it's basically targeting Mono, and most of the code that's been running is targeting .NET as a whole. And there's let's say just a hole to get to JavaScript and to the DOM to be able to draw something on the screen, on the page itself.
Okay. So this is actually a great thing. I mean, Chris, do you mind if I jump right into it?
Absolutely, go for it.
So I am a Linux user, former Mac guy, who loves C#. Why? Because I'm a sick bastard, Jérôme. I have a problem. I need
That's
your
not a
help.
problem to love C#. I mean,
No, I need your help though, because I'm very confused.
sure.
So I have .NET proper on Windows, right? I have .NET Core, which is what I'm using for my command line scripts, and then I have something called .NET Standard. Where is your project in? What are you targeting in relation to that? How does it work?
It's none of the three. So that's
Again,
the
always
problem
wrong.
with Microsoft.
I mean, I'm batting 1,000.
So .NET Desktop is what Microsoft has been calling just .NET for let's say the early 2000s. So it's something that's been there for quite a while. Microsoft rebooted a bit of things and then did .NET Core with kind of rethinking a little bit of the internals of .NET, especially removing things that were legacy or like the app domains and cross app domains things that may not be interesting for the server side of things like ASP.NET Core. And then there's .NET Standard in the middle, which is just basically a bridge between the two. If I try to make it leveled, but .NET Standard is just an API. It's just an API definition. It's not an implementation. And what makes it interesting is that .NET Standard set of API definitions also works on Mono. So it works on Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android, and it happens also to work on Mono WebAssembly. So it's just the same code.
Okay.
But yeah, so it's
No, go ahead.
it's just a set of API. So for instance, it will allow you to use a system.io.file.open to be able to run it in the same way on all platforms. And .NET Standard just defines all of those APIs. Right. Sometimes they're not implemented. So for instance, I think the registry APIs are there, but they don't make sense on WebAssembly. Neither they do on iOS nor Android or Linux for that matter. But they're there. So it allows to compile and target for .NET Standard, have a single binary that runs across all those platforms at once.
Okay. So I think this is a great area of confusion for our listeners, or at least for me personally. And let's be honest, that's what really matters here. .NET Standard is not one format, right? It's just a standard that all like Mono and a bunch of other things conform to. Is that a fair?
It really is. It really is. It's a set of definitions. You could say in the same way HTML5 is the same definition for all browsers, in a way.
That makes a ton of sense. Okay, so it's like almost like an ECMA standard, sort of. I know it's not actually an ECMA standard, but what? And I'll be honest, Jérôme, I don't already know the answer to the question. When you compile to WebAssembly for HTML5 and for your JavaScript, how does that work?
So that's the thing. It's just for Mono, most of WebAssembly is not visible at all unless you're doing low level stuff for debugging inside of Mono. You don't see it, and that what makes it so interesting in terms of targeting the web and why we pushing Uno a lot in that direction. But basically, you're getting Visual Studio Code on whichever platform you want. You add a NuGet package to your .NET project, which can be a .NET Core app or a .NET Standard targeting-ish application. And then when you press F5, it just builds your DLLs and then takes those DLLs and package them into a file structure that resembles a website. It has a bunch of JS files and then an index.html file. Just serve that, and then your application runs. That's pretty much what it is. So there's no WebAssembly per se in that package. You don't see it that much.
Okay, so but that's, I mean, you make it sound like the easiest thing in the world, but going from XAML to a HTML5 website, I mean, that's how are you accomplishing that? I mean, I've used XAML for native Windows development, and I'm a pretty big believer in WebAssembly and HTML5, and that the web is the future. But I love Uno. I'm writing something in Uno right now. I have no idea how you accomplish this.
Okay,
that sounds
there
like
are multiple levels to that
effort
question, but yes. so what I've just explained to you is the basic workflow in terms of getting something that's in the C# code. Let's say just a console application, and that's we have something that's called Uno Wasm Bootstrap, which is basically a simple NuGet package that you put inside your project, and then there's no Uno in there, no UI, no XAML. It's just taking a console application that does console write line, and it just outputs to the JavaScript console. That's it. That's what it does. Then up that layer, we put a lot of stuff that we've been building on iOS and Android for Xamarin, which is implementing all the XAML-y things like dependency object grids, stack panels, and things like that. All the UI elements that make for a XAML UI, and those are and that's cross-platform at that point. It's basically taking all those XAML concepts and either transforming the XML format of the layout to a C# code, and that C# code is just calling into APIs that come from the UWP contract. So, for instance, you have a stack panel which resembles a stack layout it can be an Android layout or things like that, a grid control, an image, and things like that. So basically, we're taking all this, which is a UWP UI definition in terms of object model, and then we're translating and transpiling, depending on the context, into let's say a UI view for iOS, a view group for Android, and divs into the WebAssembly space. So it's basically for HTML. We're not taking HTML as it. So it could take, the XAML is taken and just mashed into something that resemble a stack of divs, styled and input controls. That's pretty much what it is. And then it looks like what you see when you're running the playground, for instance.
No, that sounds amazing. So Jérôme, who is your target developer for this? And let me give you a few multiple choice here. Is it your web developer looking to use C#? Is it your, like me, iOS developer who's recently found, Tux as their Lord and Savior? Making a joke, obviously. Is it your .NET developer trying to run their code on multiple platforms? Who is it that you're thinking is your target developer?
That's a very big question, and the problem is that when we were developing for iOS and Android specifically, when wasn't there, our target was very easy. It was iOS and Android developers, and just having Windows developers just target all three platforms at once. So just develop it once, and then you got everything that you want. But then there's the WebAssembly. There was the WebAssembly part, and then it gets a little bit difficult because in there you have a lot of technical crowds there. You have the people that are developing websites, the people that do React, the people that do any kind of JavaScript, new SPA frameworks that you have on the web end, and then you have backend developers that do ASP.NET and just browser, backend development that want to have their code reused on the client, and then you have Silverlight developers as well that see a lot of interest in the fact that Microsoft kind of abandoned them, and they've invested a lot in that space, and they have no solution for reusing all that. So that makes a lot of interest there, and then there you have all the Jérôme, WPF developers.
Jérôme, I wasn't going to ask, but you've tempted me. I have done years of Xamarin development. I don't know if you've ever listened to the show, but I love the Objective-C programming language. To me, Project Uno is a better version of Xamarin. I know it ties into Xamarin, but the API...
So you mean Xamarin Forms?
I mean Xamarin Forms in particular, yes.
Okay.
It seems like, if I could wave a wand and tell Microsoft, rewrite Xamarin Forms, it would be Project Uno. Is that something you had in mind at the beginning, or did that just kind of happen?
It's been a lot of things. So we didn't know exactly where to go for that at the beginning, and what made all this clear is that it has to happen. It has to be. UWP is very interesting, and the defining factor for Uno in general, and especially XAML, is that Microsoft has been spending a lot of time with the failed attempt with Windows Phone,
yes.
and getting from small screen to very, very large screen, and they've invested so much in terms of defining XAML and the API contracts for, let's say, focus down to touch, then to animations and things like that, and all those frameworks that, especially Xamarin Forms and the others that are in that regard, they don't try to address all those concerns at once. And the UWP APIs does that. And that's what made it very interesting for us to target that. So we wish Microsoft would push a little more in that direction, which is, I don't know, I'm not in the secret of gods in that regard. So let's say that's what we wanted to have. We expected Microsoft to do it, and they didn't, so we're doing it. That's basically what's happening.
Right. I mean, Jérôme, you're very diplomatic. Permit me to be a little more forceful than you. You've effectively done Xamarin Forms correctly.
Oh, well, I didn't say it, but yeah, we've been trying to do that. And at the beginning, at the startup of Uno, Xamarin Forms didn't exist as well. And we tried to do it, and saw the two directions and pondering whether Xamarin Forms would be interesting for us or not. And we were doing a lot of Windows at the time. So, and UWP. So we didn't want to have the developers that were running, that were at Inventive, my company, to just relearn everything. So it made sense for us to go that route.
No, yeah. And I mean, your reasons seem perfectly practical, perfectly reasonable to me. Chris, do you have anything?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't mind shifting gears just for a minute and talking a little bit about the playground, because that seems like a massive undertaking just in itself, Jérôme. Can you tell me a little bit about how that came to be? And it seems like a risky move to put that much effort into something like an online editor that's so feature complete, but yet you guys nailed it. What's the story behind that?
The basic idea for that playground was to be able to just show off and let the developers do what they want to do and try out the features that are available without us just showing a static set of features that wouldn't be interesting. So we tried a few things with Mono. Just a bit of history that's kind of amazing in that sense. I took a look at Mono, and Miguel de Casa was talking about that in January of this year, and he said, "Well, we're working on a few things, and there's two branch you can do winter AOT stuff, but it's not working that much. And there's a bit of work that's done by Rodrigo Cumpera, and it was interesting, but not that much of a usable thing." Nothing happens for about 3 months, and then in March I try again, and then a lot of things work. I mean, when I'm saying a lot of things, it's just all of it worked. There was a GC, I could put in anything in there, like weak references and all the funky stuff that you can find in the Mono runtime, and it all worked. So we kept adding stuff to the runtime to see what happens, and said, well, why not take all the code that comes from iOS and just put it on WebAssembly? And then we're pushing, and then most of it's working. So, well, let's see how far we can go. And then we go to, let's say, why not take Roslyn and put it inside? And at this point, then I hit the roadblock that wouldn't make it work as I wanted. The idea was to take the C# code for a view model or something like that and just put it in the browser and compile it, and then use the compiled code inside of the browser and run it as part of the rest of the shell, if that makes sense. Does Roslyn talk to you guys?
Oh yeah,
I don't think.
Roslyn,
have we talked to him?
Web compiler for C#. Yeah.
No. Did we on the show or over email?
Okay, so
I don't remember that at all. So
Roslyn is basically the C# compiler. It's just that Microsoft has been working a lot on this, and basically it's a composable compiler, so you can take pieces of it and do whatever you want with it. And it's basically you can call in APIs. It's a C# library.
It runs in VS Code on Linux, Chris.
Exactly.
Well, there you go.
And you can take that code and compile it to run inside of the browser. So you can basically have a bunch of text, which is C#, and have the browser run the Roslyn code and compile it to an assembly that's loaded up in memory inside of the browser and executed.
So is that the long answer then to the question of because you could? Is that really the answer there? Is because you could, you decided to create the playground?
Yeah, it's basically what it is. It's just we could, and we created it. So we stopped at just being able to compile C# code to just put it some JSON context at the bottom, and then you have the browser and the playground that allows you to put some XAML and just play with it. So we have a team of designers and integrators that is able to make it pretty and usable. But that's the story there. It's just because we could, really.
I love it. I really only got one last question, Mike, so go ahead, because my last question, I mean, I just have like one more and I'm done.
Okay, so just on the topic of the Roslyn compiler, I've been watching it for years now, and I've seen it mature from something that was kind of a little bit of a side project over at Microsoft to really a main compiler, right? If you're running VS Code on Linux, you're running the Roslyn compiler.
Yes.
Do you, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, and you could just decline to answer, the Fifth Amendment and all that. Don't you see the Roslyn compiler as the future? I mean, my big bet is that I can compile C# into WebAssembly via Roslyn going forward. Don't you see that as something that could happen, or no?
So not really, because the Roslyn compiler is not made for that. It's made to produce IL code, and the runtime is able to do the taking that IL code and put it down to WebAssembly. And if in that context, it's a bit different, because in terms of WebAssembly, it's not possible at all. It's just the AOT part of it. So there's two modes for that. So no, not really. It's part of the whole solution. But producing WebAssembly directly, probably someone's going to do it at some point. But don't forget, there's LLVM in the middle, and that part is very,
maybe
very
not
complex.
directly. Maybe I'm oversimplifying the architecture. But let's say from Roslyn to IR code to some other compiler into WebAssembly is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, so that's what Microsoft is doing with Miguel de Casa and the Mono team. That's what they're doing. They're taking.
See, I blame Miguel for everything, so I don't even know about it. So there you go.
Okay, well, I wouldn't mind just asking, how is this financially possible for you? Like, what is the long-term runway there for sustainability?
Well, the basic idea is that we've been doing that for 4 years, 5 years now, maybe. It wasn't called Uno at that time, but we're basically a service company, so we're building application providers, and our way to do is basically just build once and have 4 applications running for the price of one, pretty much, because there's so much that can be reused. So the point is for us, just continue doing consulting work and build applications for our customers, and as well, now that Uno is public, do professional services on it. So you want to be able to develop an application on using Uno, and there's something that doesn't work for you, then we're going to help you at some price.
Okay, that makes so much sense, and how great that it's putting together a lot of stuff you've been using for years to service existing customers. So I can totally see how that is a sustainable project for you guys, and putting it under that Uno brand and setting up all of the Uno stuff around it is really, I think, brought a lot of attention to it. So Jérôme, thank you for coming on the show. This came on our radar a little bit ago, and we started talking about it. So it was great to chat with you and get the official word on some of the stuff and clear up some things and all of that. So really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Now, before we go any further, I want to thank DigitalOcean, do.co/coder. No S, just do.co/coder. And get it right, because when you go there, you can sign up with a new account and get a $100 credit at DigitalOcean. Now, I really want to emphasize that, because in the past, we were offering a $10 credit, and that was more than you needed to get by for 2 months on DigitalOcean without having to pay a dime. With a $100 credit, you can really build some impressive systems. Check out do.co/coder. Industry-leading price to performance. All SSDs for every system you deploy. A gorgeous dashboard that's easy to understand and extremely powerful. Cloud firewalls that you can set rules to block traffic at the edge level, 99.99% uptime, one-click deployment of entire application stacks, and also one-click deployments of like a base Ubuntu LTS with Docker ready to just get going with anything you want, or build the whole thing up from scratch. They even offer free BSDs. All the BSDs, well, really just the free BSD. They have global data centers, 40 gigabit connections coming to those hypervisors, and a really easy to use, straightforward, simple, and well-documented API. And then you stack that on top of tons of great documentation, tutorials, and a really active community. And they have team accounts as well, which makes it great when you're in a project or, in my case, working with the community. Just love all of it. And they now have these mix and match droplets where you can mix and match the resources as your application needs. I'm currently taking advantage of one of their optimized CPU droplets that have these excessively powerful CPUs with consistent and reliable performance that runs my re-encoding scripts for our PeerTube instance that we're working on. It's the best because I have a benchmark of that script that I use. I use it on my laptop. I use it on my workstation. I've used it on encoding boxes at the studio. And now I'm using it on DigitalOcean Droplet to just see the performance. And you combine that with those SSDs and then their crazy fast internet connections. It's so great. It's so great. And then that dashboard just makes it perfect. So go try it out and see what I've been talking about. do.co/coder. And a big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the Coder Radio program. They also, DigitalOcean, just put out one of their currents, which they do these every quarter now. And it's a report on developer cloud trends that they see by looking at their own internal metrics. Check this out, Mike. This is an interesting one. Containers, they say, are reaching a tipping point with 49% of developers now using them on DigitalOcean. Almost half of all DigitalOcean customers are using containers on their system. That's a pretty big number.
I bet most of those are Docker for sure.
Oh, yeah. Serverless computing is still in a much earlier stage of adoption, with nearly half of developers failing to clearly understand what it is. Boom! I didn't read that last sentence, so that totally caught me by surprise. I did not expect that at all. And bootcamp participants feel more prepared for the workforce than college graduates now. And employers seem to be warming up to bootcamp graduates. The majority of hiring managers say they still make no distinction between bootcamp versus college graduates. Bullshit. 48% have not filled any position with 48% have not filled any position with a bootcamp graduate in recent years. Almost half of the employers they surveyed had not hired people out of boot camps, but yet they say they don't. That's anyways. Yeah. What are they running inside those containers? They gave us numbers on that. 57% on JavaScript, 46% on Python, 36% on PHP, and then Go coming in at a solid 28%. Ruby all the way down at 13%.
Yeah, but where is Rust? I mean, isn't that all that matters?
Well, Rust is what's running all the stuff that's running that stuff. See, at least it will be one day, I think. I just like these. It's really fascinating because DigitalOcean's gotten to the size where they can do these surveys and actually give us some interesting data, and then they really make it look good too. So Kubernetes winning good. The orchestration platform, Docker Swarm, followed by OpenShift by Red Hat.
Yeah, and I think DO's customers tend to be more forward-leaning technology-wise, so it's a good trend of where the average is going to go in, say, 6 months.
Yeah. A lot of lukewarm responses in this survey to serverless. But I tell you, I saw a really interesting use case for serverless this last weekend. We covered it on Linux Action News 61. There is a new fork of Copperhead OS called Rattlesnake OS, and it's using Lambda to spin up people's own update instances, build the new version of the Android OS, and then do an OW update from S3 to people's phones. So it's an automatic update system that is completely free of the project's infrastructure, and it's a script run by the user that's interfacing with Lambda to build instances to do these updates and then transfer data to S3 and spin it all down. It's fascinating. I did a much better job explaining it in Linux Action News, but it is fascinating.
Yeah, well, that's a very cool use. I mean, for me, so far, I'm just using them for straight up data processing, right? Input, output kind of work.
Yeah.
But it's working great, right? And yeah.
All right. Well, before we go, I wanted just one more email to wrap it up. We got an email in from Alex, and he said, I was listening to episode 315, Chicken Farmers, and your thoughts about tribalism in the technology industry and social media. It reminded me about an article about echo chambers. And I'll put a link to this in the show notes because it's a long, weird URL. And it really it takes a hard, it takes a hard look at politics. But if you remove the references to Rush Limbaugh and political leanings and replace them with Linux distros or technology stacks, it totally holds up. So I'm going to put a link to this in the show notes because it's really long. There was, I think, one. Here's one choice poll quote that I'll tease you guys with to go read the rest. Here's a definition of an echo chamber: is a social structure from which other relevant voices have been actively discredited. Where a social bubble merely omits contrary views, an echo chamber brings its members to actively distrust outsiders. Voices are not heard in echo chambers. Other voices are actively undermined. The way to break into an echo chamber is not to wave the facts in the faces of its members. It is to attack the echo chamber at its root and then repair the broken trust. Anyways, it's very intense, but Alex sent this into the show, and he said, after I read this, I kind of gave up on social media. I even pulled out of the Jupiter Broadcasting Telegram group. I just, after I read this, I realized there is no escaping the echo chamber. In fact, the article asserts that escaping an echo chamber is actually harder than breaking out of an occult. In fact, that's the headline: "Escape the echo chamber because it's harder than escaping a cult." It entraps you just like a cult too, it argues. There you go, Mr. Dominic. This kind of it's a heady article, but I feel like it would give some people, the reason why I mention it is it would give people peace. If you're trying to struggle to understand why sometimes you see something differently than other people, no matter what facts come in, right. Doesn't matter if it's a political thing or a technology thing, that could give you some peace. So check that out.
Well, and if you've ever listened to an Apple podcast and wondered why some people get featured and others don't, that would be why.
Mr. Dominic, share with the good people some places they can find you during the week.
At POTUS, I'm not kidding, at Dumanuco.
Yeah, and follow me. I'm at Chris LAS. The whole network is at Jupiter Signal. Coder.show/subscribe for links to your favorite podcast player to get this show every single week. Thanks so much for being here, and we will see you next week.